Chefs Without Restaurants, episode 93 with Thomas O'Gara.
There's a company that I always appreciated. It's a family company with a good product and the values that they have within it. From that point to this day, they haven't wavered in the product they put out. They don't waver in the quality. And, we constantly get reminded by our CEO, Greg, that that's what will keep us here. But he says, once we lose quality or we lose the culture, then we're in trouble.
This is the Chefs Without Restaurants podcast with your host, Chris Spear. Each week, I'll be speaking with food entrepreneurs and people in the culinary industry. If you're interested in learning more about our organization dedicated to helping people build and grow their food businesses, look us up on the web at chefswithoutrestaurants.com and .org, and on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Chefs Without Restaurants. Now, enjoy the show. Welcome to the Chefs Without Restaurants podcast. I'm your host, Chris Spear. On the show, I have conversations with culinary entrepreneurs and people in the food and beverage industry who took a different route. They're caterers, research chefs, personal chefs, cookbook authors, food truckers, farmers, cottage bakers, and all sorts of culinary renegades. I myself fall into the personal chef category as I started my own personal chef business, Perfect Little Bites, 10 years ago. And while I started working in kitchens in the early 90s, I've literally never worked in a restaurant. This week, I have Chef Thomas O'Gara. With more than 25 years of food and beverage experience, he spent most of his professional career working for Marriott. Last year, Thomas started a new adventure as the Vice President of Culinary for Tessemae, an all-natural dressing and condiment producer based outside of Baltimore, Maryland. On the show, we discuss his experience with Marriott, implementing culinary programs across many of their properties. We talk about his new position at Tessemae, culinary trends, and vegetable offal. A reminder that you can help support our podcast and the Chefs Without Restaurants network by donating through our Patreon. Monthly support starts at just $5 a month. Go to patreon.com/Chefs Without Restaurants to find exclusive recipes and see our tiered rewards. And thank you to this week's sponsor, Olive & Basket. With more than 30 each oils and vinegars, Olive & Basket is my go-to for specialty food items. They also have seasoning blends, sauces, jams, pasta, honeys, chocolate, gift baskets, and so much more. Just last night, I used their blood orange vinegar on a fennel salad that I made. Sharon and Cindy do a great job curating a wide selection of items that are loved by both professional chefs and home cooks. Located in Frederick, Maryland, their shop is at 5231 Buckystown Pike, but you can also order all of their products online and have them shipped directly to your house. Go to oliveandbasket.com. And just for Chefs Without Restaurants podcast listeners, if you type in CHEF20 at checkout, you'll get 20% off your whole order. And now, on with the show. Thanks so much for listening, and have a great week. Hey, welcome to the show, Thomas. Good to have you on.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here and looking forward to it.
Yeah. So I guess we've kind of known each other for over 20 years now, although, I think it's funny. We both went to Johnson & Wales at the same time, but I don't think we even really knew each other. I don't recall ever being in any classes with you.
Yeah, I think we had a lot of mutual people we knew, but culinary was kind of a blur. But even at the final 2 years, I was a teaching assistant. So I was working during the day and then going to school at night. So quite possible, we might have seen each other, but not known it at all.
Yeah. And then I guess it was at Star Chefs probably in like 2012 or so, I think is when I kind of saw you again for the first time since school, and we had reconnected and then probably like became Facebook friends or something after that.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what it was. I think, it was probably even Jack that had said like, Chris went to Johnson, and I think he lives by you. I'm like, well, where does he live? And they're like, oh, he lives up in Frederick. And I was like, oh, he does live by me. That is a bit of a coincidence. Yeah, and I think since then we've kind of just checked in and see how each other were doing over the years.
Yeah. So you went to school for culinary. What did you get your bachelor's in? What was that in?
I got food service management. So I remember, I think when we were there was right at the cusp of, you kind of needed that management degree. I remember I had a lot of conversations with our professors, and the going opinion was you could probably do it without it, but you'd be better off if you did get it. So and of course, looking back in hindsight, I'm very, very glad that I did that.
So, have you always been interested in food and cooking? Like, did you know at a young age that you wanted to get into the food and hospitality business?
Not at the time. I look back at the things that I used to do growing up. One of the things from early on, I used to watch like Great Chefs of Northeast, like that PBS show is like Great Chefs of Hotels. And, when there was like literally it was that and like Yan Can Cook were like the two the two cooking shows actually on. So I remember I was always drawn to watching that show, but not always, tinkering and experimenting in the kitchen. But then I picked up a job, washing dishes, kind of like most of us, I'm sure, all did it at a Italian restaurant that did some catering on the side, and just kind of slowly began to work my way up through there. They gave me a knife, let me start to, chop and cook stuff. And then I think one of the turning points I realized was it was actually in home ec class in high school. I took it so I can kind of have a mulligan course where I could just veg out and not really worry about anything. And I got put into a group with a bunch of, we'll say screw ups, to put it politely. And I was always getting annoyed that they would mess up the recipe. So I was basically like kind of ushering these people out and be like, you know what, here, I'll do it. Like, you hang out over there. I'll make the peanut butter cookies. And then from there, I kind of realized, I was like, wait, I'm working as cooking. I generally enjoy this. And when the conversation became, what are you going to do with this? It started to look like a natural path. And as nascent as my experience was going into culinary school, I think it really allowed me to absorb everything that I was about to be exposed to.
So, when you got out of culinary school, what did you do for a job? What was your first job?
I was hired out of college by Marriott International. So that was, I was hired into their management development program. And that basically started the journey, that I, stopped working with them last year, but I had been with them for 20 years up until 2020.
That's a good chunk of time. So, what did you end up doing with them? I mean, I know you're traveling a lot. I've seen a lot of your photos. It seemed like you went to some really cool places. So, what did your job entail?
The short version of kind of working through the ranks is, got into the management development program. And then from there, they kind of place you into a property, and then you're there, grow from there. So I had started as a food production manager, eventually moved around the different hotels and working my way through the ranks, and pretty much worked from Boston down to DC, within different hotels that I worked at, opened, or had experience with. But then in 2008, I was hired onto a team for, we'll say corporate, the corporate team. So I was brought on to the global food and beverage team when we were starting the renovation of the Courtyard brand. So by now, if someone's been in the Courtyard, they all have the program. So it was essentially us redoing the food service for that brand, going from a buffet to an a la carte kind of offering. But then also, on top of that, I had worked through, a lot of our limited service brands, redoing their offerings within those. And being on the culinary team, I had touched a number of our, full service and luxury brands too. So the way I used to put it is I was one of the people that could tell you the kind of cereal you needed at Spring Hill Suites, but also the offerings in a Ritz-Carlton Club Lounge, which, at the time I started, there was limited service and was full service and it was luxury. And they didn't really overlap that much. So that's what really began my corporate journey. And then where the travel piece came in, at the time I was at the corporate headquarters, the company had gone to a continental structure. So, previously a lot of the items had just come out from the headquarters in Bethesda and they were shot out into the world, and people, went and worked with them from there. So as they were growing more global, I was on the team of the Americas that got, you were now responsible for what was going in that continent. It was run much more of like a business, and I was one of the first people to be brought onto that team and to be able, had to chart a roadmap of how we were going to engage with hotels, how we're going to facilitate training, and how we were going to be the boots on the ground for the market.
So were you doing any cooking at all, or was it all kind of behind the scenes management stuff?
It was a little bit of both. For the development, everything you produce, it had to have some kind of a recipe or, we'll say a use record for how you're going to make it. So everywhere from Courtyard to the full service Marriott, if we were producing something that was part of a program, there was, how to make it, how to source it, and get from there. And then as we started to work with the hotels, that's where a lot of that was based around a renovation. So they have money for a new restaurant. About 3 months out, we start working with the hotels, develop a path of, okay, here's what we need to open, here's what we need for a concept. And I would work with the hotels and the chef to figure out, okay, we're going to do this concept. What does that mean? What are our guardrails that we're going to put into our place? So, in 6 months, we're not an Italian restaurant with gumbo on the menu or something along those lines. So I was a little bit of the enforcer to make sure like this thing has to be evergreen. For a number of years, we're not going to spend $2 million on a restaurant and then reconcept another year. So you wanted to put those in process, and through that, you're going to be, obviously documenting, but you're cooking for it. It was something that I always enjoyed that, as you probably have seen is, over the years, the higher you go up in an organization, usually the further away from the knife kit you get. And from all the work that I had been doing and all the development, even in the Marriott test kitchen, there isn't sous chefs and other chefs in there. So, the first time I walked in there and they're like, we need chopped garlic. And you look around and you're like, oh, I guess that's me. So I always remained very coherent in my abilities to be able to cook. Because some of the times on the other piece of that, when you roll into somebody's hotel and you're starting to tell them about what food they need and what good food should taste like, you're like, all right, well, show me what you got. And I'm like, I love this game. If you want to be able to be a good cook and know what you're doing, and especially show it to other people, you got to be able to show up when it's time.
Yeah. And some people don't mind not cooking. I mean, a lot of people get into culinary and then they just decide they're okay with being, behind the scenes in management. That wasn't me. Like, I always wanted to keep my hands in cooking, which is such a challenge, I think. Like you had said, as you move up through the ranks, I found that I was more of an HR manager than I was a chef at some point, and I had to find ways to kind of rewrite my own job description so that I could stay in the kitchen more.
And it's something that inherently it happens, between all the things you need to do for accounting, exactly what you said, all the HR stuff. You really almost had to find time to be out there looking and seeing what's going on, in the kitchen. And especially, whenever I had the opportunity to do a bigger program or, some kind of a reception or, something a little bit outside the norm, like that's where, you get all geeked up on that stuff. It's like, all right, we're going to go to Chef Central. We're going to buy a bunch of stuff. We're going to get some new, plateware to play with. And that's what sometimes became discouraging when I would, be connecting with somebody about a VIP banquet or something very high profile. And they just kind of roll in and play dead. They're like, well, do whatever you're going to do. I'm like, it's what I used to say when I was training people. I'm like, we all got into this business because we loved it. Like that was part of, what got us in here. And, I used to put people on call them on the carpet and say, look, like if you want to go work with accounting and spreadsheets, why don't go work in accounting? Don't roll in with this just piss poor attitude that I need to worry about month end. Yes, you have to worry about month end, but you got into this and you're wearing chef lights. So you know what? Act like it.
You had mentioned that you worked there until last year. So what are you doing now?
I'm currently the vice president of culinary for Tessemae's All Natural. So Tessemae's is a all natural dressing condiment manufacturer based outside of Baltimore, Maryland. And I had known about them for quite some time. There was a colleague of mine, Tessemae, who me and her worked on the global team together, kind of with some of the programs that I was referencing before. And she had left Marriott and then went to Tessemae's when they were still a growing company. They are still a growing company. And me and Kristen had always stayed in touch. We, good friendship. And I had always kind of been intrigued with the company, and all through the years, I've been watching them grow. And, at one point a few years back, we were close to potentially me jumping ship back then, but, just things didn't work out. There was some life things going on that, kept me in my place. But it was a company that I always appreciated. It's a family company with a good product and the values that they have within it. From that point to this day, they haven't wavered in the product they put out. They don't waver in the quality. And, we constantly get reminded by our CEO, Greg, that that's what will keep us here. But he says, once we lose quality or we lose the culture, then we're in trouble. I think that was tested over this last year with, obviously everyone being remote, myself included. But, as far as, looking back over the last year to switch, I couldn't be happier with the way things worked out.
So what exactly are you doing for them?
I don't know.
Still a work in progress?
Yes, it's still a work in progress. But we've begun to develop different line extensions of whether it be a request from a retailer or a project of something we think the market needs. So one of the first items that I was brought on last year was working on a balance box, which is a kind of a meal replacement, or on the go kind of a snack item that paired with our dressings. We went through and made sure there was a lot of quality other products to complement that. I've worked on the development of those. And then in addition, like I said, we work with a lot of different retailers, and one of them being Sam's Club. So Tessemae's had pitched them a few years ago about trying to get dressing in their stores. And Sam's Club was like, we want to buy a whole salad. We don't want just the dressing. So we went out, found a produce vendor that we could work with, and then began to put together these kits with these different salads together, obviously paired with our dressings. And the way we look at it is Sam's Club, obviously the breadth and expanse they are through the United States, it gave us the ability to get better food in people's hands. Our slogan is simplify food to amplify life. And part of that is, not just speech to throw it out there for people, but we want to get better, cleaner food in people's hands. And, and so that's where the relationship we have with them gets our product in a lot of people's hands and cleans up a space that a lot of people aren't looking at now, but it's very much been amplified over the last year. The growth that we've seen in the product is, people were panic buying at first, but they continued to buy. I think a lot of that is, people are still making their meals at home. And if they're the one cooking all the meals, they start to become a lot more cognizant of the label and what's in it. And, the piece I tell people that I love is like, we're the best out there. And there isn't really a comparison.
I've never been a big Walmart shopper, but every time I go in there, I'm always surprised at the smaller companies that they have on their shelves and some really great products. I always kind of think of them as this huge box store that's like this big machine. And then I'll go in and find like a really super local or super small or really cool organic product. And I think that's one of the things is like getting really good products in the bigger stores and the places where more people are shopping.
Well, exactly that. And I remember, when I would be doing training at Marriott, I would say, who do you think the number one seller of organic goods are? And people would, name just like a, Whole Foods or, Sprout and any one of those. No, it's Walmart. Like them putting Stonyfield yogurt in stores at the time, that, they're the ones that can help to change the temperament of the industry and getting it in people's hands. And it was something, when I worked at Marriott, you're very cognizant that the changes you make, the products you put out, and the messaging and how they're done, you can very much change the industry. I remember one of the projects I worked on with Marriott before the pandemic, we started to look at the room service space, and room service had its stigmas. It deserved every single one. So we went and decided to innovate in that space. Part of that being, get the speed that you can get it up to your room. So we started to investigate putting it in packaging versus, having it in China with the Guéridon and, all the things that entailed. And at that time, all the packaging in the industry was just crap. So we went out and developed our own. Obviously, it took a little while, but we got everything like we need to. But since we had done that, you've watched things get changed over the years. Things got a little more dynamic. Things got a little more interesting. It wasn't just a bunch of styrofoam containers anymore. And, I'd credit to the team that helped do that. But that's, us doing, Marriott doing that was part of what changed the industry with what was expected in that space.
Well, what are you passionate about in the food industry? Are there any things that really excite you?
I think just staying on top of it, with watching what trends are, seeing what has staying power, seeing what will become the next it thing, and how that constantly changes. So that's where, especially in my last roles, including this one, is you need to have a pulse on top of that. So whether there's a flavoring that's going, to be coming to the forefront, or is there a cuisine that's really just becoming a thing? I think for, one of the best examples of that is Chipotle, not the restaurant, but the condiment is, this was some like wild thing. It was the smoky tasting different, flavor that people weren't used to, but it was very palatable and also went with it across a lot of different genres. And it just became a very big thing. Watching vegetables do that. I remember it was, around 2005, I had put Brussels sprouts on a banquet menu and, roasted them very similarly what you see today. It's roasted Brussels sprouts and balsamic and a little bit of pancetta, and would bring them out and people were like, ooh, Brussels sprouts. And I'm like, just try them. And they're like, oh my God, these are amazing. And, I would say at that point, probably a little ahead of the curve before it came. But, the fact that the staying power of that vegetable to this day, that is just such a maligned.
My number one selling side dish for my business, when I propose vegetables, Brussels sprouts are number one, which is insane to me. But, again, it's proper cooking technique. I am 100% sure that my mother never roasted them if we ever had them. If you had them, they were probably frozen and they were either boiled or microwaved, and those are disgusting. I still won't eat them. But, I like to cut them in half so you have more surface area, and then heat up some bacon fat in a cast iron skillet, throw them in there, and then throw the skillet in the oven, finish it off with a little chopped bacon, something a little sour, maybe some lemon juice, maybe some vinegar, a little brown sugar, you're good to go.
When we were doing some of the initial work for that, the packaging I was telling you about, we were in Amsterdam and we were in Belgium, and we're talking with the people there, and they're like, well, what are some of the trends in the United States? And, even at that time, I was like, what, Brussels sprouts is one of them. And they all looked at me with that puzzled look, like, what do you mean? And I was like, well, when you have them, like, how do you eat them over here? And he's like, oh, my mom would, score the bottom a little bit and then steam them and put a little bit of cinnamon on top. As I was throwing up in my mouth a
That
little
sounds
bit, I was like,
horrible.
yeah, I was like, that's why people hate them. That's exactly why. And then I explained them, very, very similar to what you did. They need acid and they need fat, and if that fat's a cured pork product, it's that much better. But that roast them at a higher heat than you feel comfortable doing, get some good caramelization, fat and acid, and, they're a great vehicle for flavor.
All of the vegetables that most of my customers order, they're all like brassicas or cruciferous vegetables. I do tons of cauliflower, broccoli, Brussels sprouts, cabbage, all that kind of stuff. Again, so weird. Nobody's ordering carrots or green beans or peas or any of that stuff. I don't even really like cooking that stuff.
Cauliflower, as you said, that's another one that's kind of just kicked into another stratosphere where I remember seeing a meme where it said, did anyone ask cauliflower if it was okay becoming all these different things like pizza crust and queso and like every base to a dip? And it's, and it continues to this day. I mean, as much as I thought more heirloom carrots were going to become a thing, a year or two ago, they've kind of stayed in this same place. But Brussels and cauliflower have kind of been two that keep evolving. And it's what I would tell people with, as I'm sure you and most of the other people know, when you're hiring a chef, you give them a cook test. And, so sometimes people will, they would send me a note, say, we got a cook test. I'm going to give them these different items and, have them prepare some dishes. So I'm like, well, what'd you give them? They're like, well, I gave them a ribeye steak and a filet. And I looked there, if you haven't figured out by now, I'm pretty candid. I'm like, why don't you just give them a hamburger? Like, screw it. Like, just here, you grill these things. And they, I sometimes get a puzzled look and they're like, what do you mean? I'm like, give them vegetables. I was like, put broccoli in front of people and say, make broccoli sexy. Make this sexy and make it taste good. I was like, and if they do it, they know what the hell they're doing. I go, because it's pretty easy to grill a steak to medium well. We cook burgers all day long. If somebody can take a vegetable and make it exciting, that's the person you want.
I love it. I would do the same thing. I would break out. I was like a kid in a candy store when I had to give one of these to a guy coming in. I loved it. I would just get a bin and put, I'd put some offal. It's like I've got some chicken livers in there. I've got some chicken thighs. Let's get some catfish. Let's get some Brussels sprouts. Take some, Marcona almonds or some weird nut. Maybe break out like a chimichurri sauce and just see what they're doing, because I do think, there are a lot of people doing modern cooking like you and I in some of these places. I worked in contract food, but you also kind of got these quite often old school chefs who are very much like filet and béarnaise kind of guys. And it's like, I really wanted to tell what kind of chef was coming in. And that's not the kind of chef I was looking to hire.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And then, one of the things that I've done over the last few years, we skipped last year, sadly, because of COVID, but I started working with a local farm by me, and, it started out as a little booth during an open house, and we grew it into a dinner. And the dinner is focused on the vegetables that they grow. And, we kept it at a manageable amount of people, but part of the planning for that was I would take last year's harvest list and I would start working up a menu off of that. And then, a month out, I'd be like, how's everything looking? And they're like, I don't know if peas are going to make it. And, we might have a challenge here. And so I'm like starting to whittle down. Okay, maybe don't have this, got to look at this. And I'm like, well, what about the carrots? I'm like, no, bugs got the carrots, no more carrots. I'm like, well, what do you have? And they're like, well, we got turnips. Like, oh, God damn it. But I always liked it because, as a chef, you need to be able to think on your feet. And this was an ever evolving thing that, you could call the produce company and have this stuff shipped in. But I like to keep myself in the box of it came off this farm, and that was one of the, the things I loved at the dinner. I was like, we would supplement a little bit of protein from local farms, but I was like, nothing here traveled more than 15 to 20 miles to get here. And, when I turn around and I did something with the turnips. Made like a miso glazed turnip with a little bit of yuzu kosho powder over top. And you blow people's minds. So it was like, I blew my mind when I made it first because like, oh, I didn't know I had that in my back pocket. But, when you could take those things that are, somewhat maligned or just looked at as pedestrian vegetables and make them that much better, it's, you get people interested in that.
Well, that's where the creativity comes in. Similarly, I used to do like a sustainability dinner at my last job, and we would try and use as many cooking byproducts as we could. So, like saving cauliflower cores. And I made like a harissa with that. So you just chopped them up and put them in the Vitamix with all this stuff for harissa. And you got this like nice chunky condiment using something that would go in the trash, saving corn husks and turning it into ice cream. I don't know if you've ever heard of my famous corn husk ice cream, but you take them and you dry them in the oven and then infuse them into your milk and cream base. And you get this really nice toasted corn flavor. And again, that's something that would just go in the trash. And I find that kind of stuff fuels your creativity because we're like, well, we're committed to like really not throwing anything away and let's see what we can do. And me and my chefs, we did a great job. And just every year we did this for like 8 years and would keep pushing ourselves. And the whole year we'd like plan up for that event. So in the process of that, we just incorporate it into our natural menus for our other customers and say like, oh, what do you think of this? And we came up with some pretty cool stuff.
Yeah, it's something in the last few that I've begun to, put that piece into there as well. Especially coming from a local farm, you want to, much like animal butchery, you want to use as much as the animal as possible. As having some bright, delicious beet leaves, and people just usually chuck those in the trash. So I was like, no, you can cook with them, and even down to all the tomatoes at the end of the season, they'd be frozen. So, I typically lead off with last year's tomato bisque and, just kind of get the messaging out there that it's, vegetables are much like meat in the fact that they have a lot of different parts, but you're just usually eating one of that.
Vegetable offal.
Yeah. Could be our new term. I don't know if I've ever heard that.
I just came up with that on the fly. I don't know.
Yeah, you trademark that for like get a vegetable offal dinner going.
Well, I find that greens are great in kimchi. So like beet greens, all that kind of stuff. Like you were saying that people would normally throw out. You can save the greens that come off of cauliflower. You can save the greens that come off of kohlrabi, and just that stuff's great. Just chiffonade it up and then toss it into a big batch of kimchi.
Yeah, that's even down to little stuff like celery leaves. Like celery leaves, people usually pick those away, or they taste just as good as everything else. You could eat them in whatever you're dipping it in, or you can also incorporate it into the recipe as well. It's just I think it's what you have seen and what you were growing up, how you were processing these, but once you start to open up your eyes to all those little pieces, there's a lot more food there than just the little component of what you're looking at. It was funny when you said the cauliflower. I remember, it was a number of years ago that I'd seen Michael Samanov at Zahav. On his menu, the special is a cauliflower heart with, a date puree or something like
so
that.
So he's the one like, I stole the cauliflower core harissa from him. Like, 100%. I wasn't going to say it, but since you mentioned him, he did a demo at Star Chefs, and I did the workshop with him, and we used that as the condiment on his hummus. So he's like, yeah, this is a really cool thing. He's like, instead of throwing those away, you just take them and chop them up and make your harissa in the Vitamix, but put the cauliflower cores in there. And it was like a condiment to go inside his hummus. So
yeah, I didn't mean to blow up your spot, but I always remember that was, I was always enamored looking at that. I was just like, but that's also what chefs do. I think, when you're explaining to people that, why short ribs cost more than, a prime steak these days is, short rib used to be a throwaway butcher's cut. Then somebody turned around and was like, I'm going to braise this. I'm going to braise this and we're making it nice and tender. And you know what? This thing is delicious. And then it hits the mainstream of, what's going in there. It's the same like chicken wings, back before, the buffalo wings became a thing. That was a throwaway piece because everyone wanted the breast and the rest of it. They just, just give it to somebody else. And now hell, I mean, we have a chicken wing shortage and they're going for, a ridiculous amount per pound because that's all people are eating these
Yeah, I
days.
don't want a chicken breast.
No, it's literally the last thing. That's where, I always think back to, I remember at Johnson and Wales, when I was a teaching assistant, and a few of the locations we were feeding the students. So we would obviously, we would have to work within a budget, and we would always have chicken thighs. There was rarely ever chicken breast. And, all the students, why is the chicken breast? I want a chicken breast. I'm sick of chicken thighs. And, fast forward, that's all I'd rather eat.
Well, I'll have to say one of my roommates at Johnson Wales was also a TA. He's also been a guest on this podcast, but not outing him by name. But when he was working at the Radisson, it was Super Bowl weekend, and he used all the chicken wings to make chicken stock that they were supposed to be using for wings. Ooh. And that did not go over really well.
Now that's what freaks people out. I'm sure you know it, but if they're like, well, I want to make a really good chicken stock. I'm like, oh, good. Go get a bunch of chicken feet. And they're like, wait, what? I was like, oh, yeah. You want a good chicken stock. I was like, they probably don't have it at your local supermarket. Go to your local Asian or Indian supermarket. They'll have them there. I go, once, if you're not ready for what chicken feet look like, they look like they think, but they will make you the best damn stock you've ever had. So
absolutely. Well, you said you like staying on top of trends and such. What are some of your favorite culinary resources? Do you like websites, magazines, cookbooks? Where do you find inspiration?
Cookbooks, as much as I like to collect the ones from people that are coming, I find that I look through them. I maybe try a few recipes, but I don't cook through them as much. I kind of just look for, what went into making it. I think, any of the French Laundry cookbooks are like a linear of them. That's, it's a coffee table book as much as it is functional. And then, now it's the internet, but within the internet, you could follow the chefs on Instagram. Some are better showing of what they're working on than others. And then, diving into the restaurants within each city. Part of, what I've been attuned to do is, whether it be Eater or Infatuation or any of those, is knowing what's going on in every single major city and everywhere in between, and then figuring out which of these really has some legs, which, I think the toughest part of this last year is everyone had to hunker down and everybody started really skewing towards more home style meals, and it, completely understandable. It's not something that they really could, but I think when Alinea is making beef Wellington with mashed potatoes and a chocolate tart, it shows you that, one, they're not too proud to say, we have to make this an overinflated version of what it is, but they realize that they have the pulse of what's going on and it resonated with their guests. It was something that I used to teach as well, that, having some of those tried and true items on your menu. So whether it be the short rib, whether it be the Caesar salad, those items, there's a comfort and a familiarity there, and people eat very emotionally, and food has, very emotional part of people's lives. And I think that's kind of telling for what happened over this last year is, it's people, they weren't going as much. They were just kind of looking for what they enjoy. And, when I would be traveling, for, 4 or 5 days at a clip sometime, I was like, you know what? I just want a burger.
In general, that's what I want to be eating now. Like, I'm not interested in this long 3-hour dinner. Like, there's not that many like Michelin 3s or even 2s I want to go to, like a solid 1 or like that kind of restaurant, that place that's not overly stuffy where you can get some really cool food. But yeah, I don't know. I'm not interested in it anymore. Like, I could care less about going to the French Laundry, to be honest.
Yeah, it's, there's a time and a place, but, the exact sentiment that you just said, a lot of people that have been able to go around and experience a lot of decent food, that's, kind of what that becomes. The part of that I always hate is when they are just going that over the top. I'll never forget. I was at a 2-star Michelin restaurant in Chicago, and every course was 3 paragraphs long in description. And the sommelier, the wine that was pairing with the course was another 5 paragraphs of what it was. And at first you're kind of sitting there, just kind of nodding your head and okay, being cordial, but that 1 ounce of pheasant breast on your plate is not getting any warmer. Like if it was warm when it left the kitchen, and you feel rude, but it's like, all right, you need to read the room a little bit too. You need, if you want to look and see how your food is landing and how your guests are feeling, you can't just walk up to the table and say, how's everything going? Because, people go like, oh, it's fine. Because
Yeah.
they want to get you out of the way,
Keep moving.
So yeah, exactly. I was like, look around, look at the plates, look at how many people are coming back, and then ask some questions. But
yeah, I mean, I'm heading down to Asheville, North Carolina tomorrow, and then we'll be in Charleston, and I'm jazzed to go to Buxton Hall Barbecue. Like that's number 1 on my list, and that's just a awesome barbecue spot. Like that's kind of where I'm at these days. That's the most exciting place I want to go. And then I'll hit Scott's Barbecue when I get down to Charleston, and we'll go to somewhere like Edmond's Oast, but no like super, super formal places on my list.
same exact thing. There's a happy medium with what I like to look for. And, these days I can kind of look at a restaurant's menu and figure out, is it going to be worth the money? Is the food look like it's good enough? And then figuring all those out. That's for, kind of speaking in Chicago, like the Purple Pig, which, has been around for a number of years, but it's fantastic. It's one of my favorites, probably in the United States, because they have creative cooking. There's a lot of vegetable focused dishes, things that are very simple, just turned on their head. And, for a place, when I would travel, I wouldn't usually go back to the same place I'd been to in another city. But literally every time I go to Chicago, I have to go to Purple Pig. And, and then even from there, they do change the menu, but the items that I've known to grow and love. So I always remember I was there and posting on Instagram, and my boss at the time was like, there's other restaurants in Chicago. And I was like, yep, I love this one. And then I'm posting more dishes, and she's like, there's other dishes they serve at the Purple Pig. And I was like, yep. But you know what? I'm eating the pork neck gravy and the turkey leg, and I'll throw in some other things, but I'm definitely getting all these.
Well, if you could work with anyone for a day or shadow them, is there anyone you'd really want to hang out with, either in the kitchen or just anywhere?
I would say, as many times as I've thrown a linea out there, like I've watched Grant Achatz from when he was, working at Trio in Evanston, Illinois. And, as the internet was just taking hold, like the E-Curious blogs and Bonjwing Lee, who was posting the pictures when literally the internet was just a bunch of chat boards. And I've watched him, continue to grow, progress, but still be mindful about what's going on, kind of as we referenced. And, I had the pleasure of meeting him a few times, and just somebody that's that in tune with what you could do with food, but also understanding that sometimes you need to turn around and reinvent yourself. And sometimes you need to read the room and change the entire style of your cuisine and do it proactively versus reactively, like the rest of the industry typically does.
Well, I think similarly, Nick Kokonis, his business partner, is quite an innovator in the food service world. I mean, he's got his own reservation platform. I mean, he came up with all these new ideas during COVID. So the pairing of those two guys, I think they're doing some really interesting stuff.
Exactly. It's one thing for a bunch of people to say they hate Open Table or whatever it is. It's another one to go build a platform and then have it rise to the top as the number one place for people to go. And and at the end of this, with the industry too, especially in that world, is cover your costs. People don't realize when places take reservations, especially now, that if you don't show up, there isn't always necessarily a line out the door either. And that restaurant's going to be eating that cost all because you were a little too callous to call up and, and let them know. So, I'm always a big proponent of, if I can't make a reservation or something like that, you need to let them know. But I think it's shown a light to more people that, these restaurants, they will work on, even the expensive ones work on razor thin margins. And especially with the quality of the product they bring in, that, restaurants are tough. It's a world, that's, been amplified over the last year, and the ones that can continue to, pull it out and make ends meet, we hope that they continue to make that happen over the years.
Yeah, I'll be standing by waiting to see what happens for sure. So your Instagram, we didn't really jump into, but briefly, you're kind of showcasing your travels via food adventures. Is that right?
Yeah, it's kind of morphed over time. As you scroll down, you can, it started as my personal one, and then, like you had mentioned, me traveling, I would kind of showcase some of the places that I had been to. But especially over this last year, I realized that, I wanted to try and showcase any local place I go to. So, I'm a chef. People know that I like good food, but it wasn't always getting out there as broadly as some other people. So I've tried to make it a point over the last few months to showcase some of the good local food we have here in the DMV. And then also, if I do get a little bit of travel, that's one piece of it there. But it was my little part of hoping, to try and give back and spread the word of places that are doing a good job.
And that's DMV Chef Travels, right?
Correct. Yeah. Then I'm also going to give a shout out for my company, Tessemae. So obviously you can go to the website for them. All the products are available, and Tessemae is available in a good number of your local grocery stores, Walmart, Target, Whole Foods. When I explain to people, if you want something that we don't use additives, thickeners, and all the crap that makes your normal dressing go for $2 for 10 ounces, none of that is in ours. We like to keep our labels nice and clean, as well as our product. And as our CEO would say, it's got to taste good and don't mess with the quality.
What's your favorite product? Do you have one?
Yeah, we have a habanero ranch. So habanero, people may think it's a little bit too spicy. It's got a good kick to it, but I mean, hot damn, it's good on everything. We have a number of good products. We have a collaboration with the Jerry Garcia Foundation. We have Jerry sauce, which is it's like a barbecue honey mustard with a little bit of fish sauce into it. It's fantastic little condiment, and good little story with that group as well. And, they've got that at Whole Foods and online as well too. So we keep on turning out tasty products and making products to get better food in people's houses.
Right on. Well, I'll have to try some of those. The habanero ranch sounds amazing.
I know a guy. We'll see if we can get you some stuff.
Fantastic. Well, thanks so much for coming on the show. I'm so glad you made the time and we could catch up.
Yeah, absolutely. No, this flew by. It was a good time catching up with you, sir.
Well, to all our listeners, this has been the Chefs Without Restaurants podcast. As always, you can find us at chefswithoutrestaurants.com.org and on all social media platforms. Thanks so much and have a great week. Thanks for listening to the Chefs Without Restaurants podcast. And if you're interested in being a guest on the show or sponsoring a show, please let us know. We can be reached at chefswithoutrestaurants@gmail.com. Thanks so much.